At the dinner table that night, my son Ethan suddenly raised his voice and said something that cut straight through me. He looked right at me and announced, "You are a loser, but Mom's new husband is not." I did not respond out loud, but the insult hit me deep. I kept my face neutral, even though inside I felt humiliated and shaken. 1 week later, Ethan would be without a car, without money, and without a place to sleep. And that very same evening, my ex-wife called me in a panic and said something that completely changed the course of everything that followed. That night had started out like any other family dinner in our modest home in Rockford, Illinois. The smell of roast beef still hung in the air, mixing with the buttery scent of mashed potatoes cooling on our plates. It was early spring, the kind of evening when the weather finally softens after winter, and we had the windows cracked open to let in a cool breeze drifting in from the nearby river. The house felt calm, familiar, and safe, at least at first. Ethan, who was 30 years old at the time, sat across from me. He was stabbing at what was left of his food with more aggression than necessary, his jaw tight and his shoulders tense. To my right sat my daughter Lauren, 28, wearing that gentle smile she always used when she sensed tension. She had always been the peacekeeper in our family. We were talking about ordinary things, work schedules, the changing weather, the new flowers starting to bloom in the backyard. Nothing important, nothing dangerous. Then, without warning, Ethan slammed his fork down on his plate. The sharp clatter shattered the quiet of the room and made my chest tighten. He leaned back in his chair and said loudly, "You are a loser, Dad." His voice was sharp, deliberate, and cruel. But Mom's new husband, Victor, is not. He actually has life figured out. Big business deals, luxury cars, real success. Honestly, I think I might start calling him my father instead. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It felt like someone had punched the breath out of me. My fingers clenched around my glass of water, the outside slick with condensation, but I stayed silent. I was not ready to speak yet. Across the table, Lauren gasped and brought her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Behind Ethan, a framed family photo caught my attention. It was an old picture from about 10 years earlier, taken at a backyard cookout. We were all smiling then, arms around each other, before the divorce tore our family apart. Seeing that image while hearing his words made my stomach twist. After everything I had done for him, how could he say something like that? "That is not fair," Lauren snapped, finally breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the hurt underneath. She leaned forward, her chair creaking softly. "Dad has been there for us our entire lives. He is the one who built this family, not some outsider. What you are saying is cruel." Ethan scoffed and shoved his plate away from him, so hard it nearly slid off the table. "Cruel? Please," he said with a sharp laugh. "Look at him. 62 years old and still breaking his back in construction, barely getting by. Victor is a real success story. He knows how to win. Dad is just average." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly across the hardwood floor, the sound scraping against my nerves. I stayed seated, frozen, as memories rushed back to me. I thought about the period right after the divorce, when Melissa left me because she said she wanted a better life. Ethan had been 20 at the time, newly graduated and completely unsure of himself. I remembered handing him the keys to a brand new Honda Civic I had bought for him. It was not flashy, but it was dependable. I had told him it was to help him get started. He had barely smiled and muttered, "Thanks, I guess. But Victor drives a Mercedes." That moment had hurt back then, but I buried it. Over the years, I paid his rent, covered his bills, and supported him while he chased one unrealistic plan after another. I worked overtime, skipped vacations, and stretched myself thin to keep him afloat. And now here we were. "Ethan, sit down," I finally said, keeping my voice calm even though my jaw was clenched so tightly it ached. "We are family. We do not speak to each other like this." He laughed again, bitter and hollow. "Family? You have been holding me back, Dad. Victor understands how things work. He gives real advice and real opportunities. You are outdated." With that, he grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair and stormed toward the front door, his heavy footsteps echoing through the house. Lauren reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Do not listen to him," she said softly. "He is wrong. You are a great father. I do not know what is going on with him, but this is not about you." Her words helped, but the damage was already done. She stood up, wrapped her arms around me in a quick, comforting hug, and told me she would talk to him later. Then she followed him out, the front door closing with a quiet click that left the house unnervingly silent. I stayed where I was, staring at the half-eaten plates, the crumpled napkins, and the roast beef slowly cooling in its own juices. My thoughts raced as I replayed everything. Ethan had been living rent-free in a house I bought for him, driving a car I maintained, all while idolizing Victor, the smooth-talking, 55-year-old businessman who stepped into Melissa's life after the divorce. Victor with his tailored suits, confident smile, and constant promises that he would upgrade the family. Meanwhile, I had spent decades working in the heat, pouring concrete, building homes, and sacrificing my body to build a future for my children. The family photo on the wall felt like it was mocking me now. The clock in the kitchen ticked steadily, each second making the silence heavier. I did not clean the table. I did not stand up right away. I just sat there and let the anger settle, turning it over in my mind until it hardened into resolve. I thought about every bill I had paid, every sacrifice I had made, and every time Ethan compared me to Victor. I knew then that I had reached my limit. If Ethan wanted to call me a loser, he was about to learn exactly what life looked like without my support. Eventually, I stepped outside into the backyard. The night air was cool and carried the faint scent of blooming flowers from a neighbor's yard. I left the dining room lights on, their warm glow spilling out through the sliding glass door. I grabbed a beer from the refrigerator and walked onto the deck, the wood creaking under my weight as I looked up at the clear night sky, the stars scattered above like distant lights. I opened the bottle and took a long drink, the bitterness matching the feeling growing inside me. As I paced across the damp grass, still wet from an earlier rain, Ethan's words replayed in my head over and over. Finally, I sat down in the old patio chair I had built myself years earlier, its paint chipped and worn from time and weather, and stared up at the stars as my thoughts drifted back through everything that had led us here. It felt like the night was reaching into me and pulling memories out one by one, forcing me to confront everything I had ignored for years. Sitting there under the fading stars, I thought about the day I bought Ethan that house, 5 years after the divorce. He had been 25 then, drifting from one job to another, always with a new excuse ready. "Dad, I just need some stability so I can finally get on my feet," he had said over the phone, his voice heavy with desperation and rehearsed sincerity. So I did what I believed any father would do. I dipped into my savings and put down the payment on a modest 2-bedroom house in a quiet suburb outside Rockford. It was not fancy, but it was safe, clean, and close to everything he said he needed. The mortgage was in my name, of course, because his credit was a mess. I still remember standing with him in the empty living room, the smell of fresh paint sharp in the air. "This is your opportunity, son," I told him then. "Do not waste it." He had grinned and slapped me on the back, full of promises. But within a few months, the mortgage payments were coming out of my account alone. "Just this once, Dad," slowly turned into "just until I land something big." And all the while, Victor lingered in the background, taking Melissa on expensive trips and whispering about investments, while I quietly covered the costs of our children's lives. I took another drink, the cold beer anchoring me as anger rose in my chest. Another memory surfaced, last Christmas. Ethan had opened the envelope I gave him and found a check inside to cover his car repairs. He barely looked at it. "Thanks," he said flatly, tucking it away. "But Victor is talking about investing in my ideas." Victor's ideas. It was always Victor. That man had positioned himself as the savior of the family, soaking up praise while I remained the invisible foundation holding everything together. But sitting there beneath the night sky, something finally snapped into place. I realized I was done letting it go. Fairness had guided my entire life. I worked brutal hours in construction yards, dust coating my boots and sweat soaking my clothes, all to give my kids the stability I never had. And now Ethan's entitlement and contempt had crossed a line. I crushed the empty bottle in my hand and set it on the railing. The eastern horizon was beginning to lighten, the sky shifting from black to pale gray. As the first hints of dawn appeared, resolve settled over me like dew on the grass. When morning came, I was already awake. The stars were gone, but the clarity they gave me remained. I skipped breakfast, grabbed my keys from the hook by the door, and headed out. The metal felt cold and solid in my hand. I slid into my old pickup truck, and the engine came to life with its familiar rumble, cutting through the quiet morning air. As I drove through Ethan's neighborhood, dew clung to the windshields of parked cars. I had chosen this area years earlier for its safety and convenience. The air smelled of wet grass, but my mind was locked forward. There were no doubts now. When I pulled up in front of his house, the Honda Civic sat in the driveway, its paint still gleaming from the last wash I paid for. The house looked occupied but neglected, curtains pulled tight against the light. I stepped out, my boots crunching against the gravel, and knocked on the door, 3 firm knocks that reflected exactly how I felt. I heard movement inside, then the sound of the lock turning. Ethan opened the door looking half awake, his hair a mess and his eyes dull from a late night. He stood there in wrinkled pajamas, nothing like the confident man who had insulted me the night before. "Dad, what are you doing here this early?" he muttered, irritation creeping into his voice. "I am here for the car keys," I said calmly. "Hand them over." He blinked, then laughed, a forced sound that grated on my nerves. "What? No. That is my car. You gave it to me." "Gave it to you?" I repeated evenly. A memory flashed in my mind, pulling into our old driveway years earlier with that very car, a ribbon on the hood like something out of a commercial. Ethan had been 22, unemployed after dropping out of community college. "This will help you get started," I had said proudly. He had shrugged and replied, "It is fine, I guess. Victor says something better is coming someday." That dismissal burned again now, fueling my resolve. "The car is registered in my name," I continued, pulling the folded paperwork from my pocket. "I have paid for every repair, every insurance bill. It belongs to me, and I am taking it back." Ethan's expression hardened. He gripped the doorframe tightly. "You cannot just show up and take it. That is theft." I stepped closer, meeting his gaze. "No. Keeping it without my permission is theft. Give me the keys, or I will call the police right now and let them decide." He hesitated, eyes flicking toward the driveway. Across the street, a neighbor paused while watering her flowers, clearly watching us. Birds chirped overhead, oblivious to the tension hanging between us. Finally, muttering under his breath, Ethan disappeared inside and came back moments later with the keys dangling from his hand. He shoved them toward me, his fingers shaking. "Fine. Take it. But this is low, Dad. Really low. Victor is right about you. You are just bitter." I took the keys without responding. Their weight in my hand felt like a boundary finally enforced. I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. It ran smoothly, thanks to the tune-up I had paid for the month before. Ethan stood on the porch with his arms crossed as I backed out. In the rearview mirror, he shrank into the distance, but the anger on his face lingered. As I drove away through the quiet streets of Rockford, passing budding trees and silent houses, momentum surged through me. My eyes flicked to the dashboard clock, and my thoughts moved to the next step. Downtown was close, and the bank would be opening soon. This was only the beginning. The drive toward downtown followed familiar roads, the river catching the morning sunlight beside me. I parked the Honda in the bank's lot, the pavement still cool from the night, and reached into the glove compartment for my folder of documents. I had every document laid out and organized: bank statements, mortgage records, and the property deed stacked neatly in my folder. When I pushed through the bank's glass doors, they swung open with a quiet rush of air, reflecting the pale blue spring sky behind me. Inside, the lobby was calm and almost silent. The polished tile floor echoed softly under my boots as I walked toward the teller counter. A young woman wearing a crisp blouse looked up from her computer, the bank's logo glowing on her screen. "Good morning, sir. How may I assist you today?" she asked in a polite, neutral tone. I placed my identification and the mortgage paperwork on the counter, laying everything out carefully so there was no confusion. "I need to stop the automatic payments on this account," I said evenly. "It is tied to a property I own, but the living arrangement has changed." She nodded and began typing, the steady clicking of the keyboard filling the quiet space. As she reviewed the account, my thoughts drifted back to the day I signed those same papers. Ethan had been sprawled in a chair at the real estate office, scrolling on his phone while I initialed page after page. "Thanks, Dad. This place is perfect," he had said casually, barely looking up. I had paid the down payment using money I earned from long overtime shifts, construction dust still embedded in my skin after exhausting days. Melissa was already gone by then, off building her new life with Victor, but I wanted Ethan to have stability. Standing there now, watching the teller work, that memory made it clear why this step was necessary. "Everything looks good," she said after a moment, printing out a form. "You will need to sign here to stop the transfers. We will notify the resident by mail, though it may take a few days." "That is fine," I replied. I signed my name with a firm stroke and gathered my documents. Just as I slid them back into the folder, my phone vibrated sharply in my pocket. I stepped away to a quiet corner near a large potted plant and answered. It was Ethan. His voice burst through the line before I could say a word. "Dad, what the hell is this? The bank just called me. They said the payments are stopping. You are evicting me? This is my house." I tightened my grip on the phone, keeping my voice controlled. "It is my house, Ethan. My name is on the deed. My money has been paying every bill. You were never a tenant on paper. You were a guest I supported. You have had years to take responsibility." His breathing grew uneven, anger giving way to panic. "You cannot do this. Where am I supposed to go? This is cruel. You are ruining my life over one comment." "One comment?" I repeated quietly, aware that someone nearby glanced over after hearing his raised voice. "This is about years of taking, son. Years of me working while you leaned on Victor. It is time you stand on your own." His tone shifted again, desperation spilling out. "Wait, Dad. Please. Let us talk. I did not mean it. Victor has been helping, but please do not do this." I ended the call without another word. The silence afterward felt heavy, even as I slipped the phone back into my pocket and felt another vibration, likely another message from him or from someone else he pulled into it. When I stepped outside, the sunlight hit me full in the face. As I walked toward the car, I wondered who Ethan would turn in next. Back home, the familiar creak of the front door greeted me. I carried the bank paperwork under my arm like armor. The drive back had been smooth, the Honda handling easily along the river roads, but Ethan's desperate voice still echoed in my head. I set the keys down on the kitchen counter, the metal clinking against the stone, and poured myself a cup of coffee from the pot I had set before leaving. Steam curled upward, the rich smell steadying me. I sat down in the living room armchair, sunlight streaming through the half-closed curtains in warm bands. My phone buzzed again. A message from Lauren appeared on the screen. "Dad, Ethan just called me freaking out. He says you are cutting him off completely. What is going on?" I took a slow sip and typed back briefly. "I am just reclaiming what is mine. He will be fine." Before I could put the phone down, it rang. Lauren's name flashed across the screen. I answered and leaned back in the worn chair. "Hey, sweetheart," I said calmly. "Dad, talk to me." She replied quickly, worry spilling into her voice. Ethan is losing it. He is talking about the car and the house. He said he is going to Victor for help. He said Victor is already talking about dealing with you, about teaching you a lesson. Are you okay? Her words landed hard, but I kept my grip steady on the mug. I walked to the window and looked out at the quiet street where children rode bikes, their laughter floating faintly through the air. I am fine, I said evenly. Ethan is just panicking. Tell me exactly what he said about Victor. She hesitated, then spoke quietly. He said Victor offered to cover the mortgage temporarily, but only if Ethan cuts ties with you completely. And Victor laughed. He told him you have been a pushover for too long. Ethan is angry, Dad, but he is scared. I nodded slowly as the pieces fell into place. Of course Ethan ran straight to him. I stared at the faded photograph on the mantel, one of all four of us at a 4th of July picnic before everything broke apart. It had been the year after Melissa left. That was the same year Victor showed up uninvited to Ethan's birthday dinner, flashing expensive gifts and a confident smile, already positioning himself exactly where he wanted to be. The watch Victor gave Ethan that night had gleamed brighter than the toolbox I had handed him years earlier. I remembered how Victor smirked and said, "Your dad is great at building houses, but I am here to build futures," tossing in a wink like it was a harmless joke. Ethan had smiled proudly, soaking it in, while I swallowed the insult and quietly worked extra hours the following month to cover his tuition. That had become the pattern. My labor, my sacrifices, dismissed and forgotten, while Victor's flashy gestures were celebrated. Sitting there now, I scrolled through my bank records and emails, seeing transfer after transfer I had made over the years. There were no thank you messages, just requests. The absence of gratitude stung, but what replaced it was clarity. "Thanks for telling me all of this," I said to Lauren, my voice firming as resolve settled in. "Victor is playing games, but I am not backing down. This is about fairness." "I know, Dad," she replied softly. "Just be careful. Ethan sounds serious." We talked a little longer, her steady support grounding me before we hung up. Afterward, I scrolled through old text messages from Ethan. The timestamps told a clear story, months of asking for money, help, favors. Not a single message acknowledging what I had done. The sense of betrayal deepened, but so did my certainty that this had to stop. I paced the living room, the floorboards creaking beneath my boots. I opened my laptop and searched through old emails and group messages. Patterns began to emerge, subtle digs from Victor, family conversations I had been quietly excluded from, decisions made without me. Somewhere down the street, a neighbor slammed a door, the sound echoing through the afternoon and reminding me of all the doors that had closed on me over the years. The alliances against me were forming faster than I expected. As I set my phone down, my thoughts shifted from reaction to preparation. I needed to protect myself. Almost immediately, the phone vibrated again. I looked down and saw Melissa's name flashing on the screen. My ex-wife. The living room suddenly felt smaller, the coffee on the table cooling as the steam faded into nothing. I answered and stood by the window, staring out at the peaceful street that mocked the storm building inside me. "Roy, what on earth are you doing?" Melissa's voice burst through the line, frantic and sharp. "Ethan is hysterical. He says you took his car and stopped paying for the house. Have you lost your mind?" I took a slow breath and gripped the windowsill, the smooth wood steadying me. "Hello to you too, Melissa. I have not lost anything. I reclaimed what is legally mine, the car I bought and the house I financed. Ethan has had years to take responsibility." She sputtered, emotion crackling through the line. "But he is your son. You cannot just throw him out like this. Victor and I are worried sick. Ethan is talking about getting lawyers involved if you do not fix this." Victor again, always pulling strings. I walked slowly around the room, passing the old family photo on the mantel. Memories surfaced as I moved. The months after the divorce when Melissa moved in with him, the extra support I kept sending, the braces, The vacations I paid for, but never joined. Victor has big plans for the kids, she had once said during a custody call, her tone light and dismissive. I had written another check and gone back to work. Lawyers, I said now, my voice calm but edged with steel. Let him try. Everything is in my name, Melissa. This is not cruelty. This is about respect. I built everything Ethan stands on. She paused, then her tone softened into a plea. Roy, please. For old time's sake. Ethan needs stability. Victor says you are being unreasonable. He is willing to help, but only if you back off. I stopped pacing. Outside, clouds gathered, dimming the afternoon light. Victor's help always comes with control, I said flatly. Tell both of them I am done being the silent provider. Ethan learns now, or he leans forever. Her voice cracked. You do not understand. He is threatening to cut you out completely. We are family, Roy. Fix this before it is too late. She hung up before I could respond. The silence afterward was louder than her accusations. I set the phone down and pulled a notebook from the kitchen drawer. The pages were crisp as I flipped to a blank one. Ideas rushed in. Legal consultations, financial safeguards, countermeasures. I started writing, mapping out my next steps. With the notebook still open and filled with hurried notes from the call, I climbed into my pickup truck and started the engine. The familiar growl cut through the quiet Rockford afternoon. The spring sun sat low, stretching long shadows across the dashboard as I drove. At a red light downtown, I scrolled through my contacts. My thumb stopped on a number I had not used in years, a lawyer I knew from old construction disputes that had gone bad. There was no room for hesitation anymore. The lines were being drawn. The light turned green, and I headed toward his office on the edge of town. The river glinted in the rearview mirror, steady and constant. When I arrived at the modest brick building, I parked and went inside. The waiting room smelled faintly of fresh coffee from a pot brewing nearby. The receptionist nodded and waved me through. Moments later, I was shaking hands with Tom, his grip firm as we sat across from each other at a desk cluttered with files. Roy, what is going on? He asked, leaning back in his creaky chair, eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. I explained everything. The car, the halted mortgage payments, the threats from Ethan and Victor, keeping my voice steady as I opened the notebook to key points. I need to know where I stand, I said. The assets are in my name, but they are talking lawyers. And Victor's business, are there any weak points? Tom reviewed the deeds I brought, tapping his pen thoughtfully. You did the right thing coming in now, he said. The house and the car are solid. Your ownership is clear. If they try emotional distress or undue influence claims, we counter with records of your financial support. He flipped another page and paused. As for Victor, he added, lowering his voice slightly, public records show his companies have had some tax liens. Nothing serious, Tom said after a moment, tapping his pen against the folder. But it is leverage if he decides to escalate. I will draft cease and desist letters as a precaution. We went deeper after that. His questions became sharper, the way an inspector checks a foundation before declaring it sound. Any shared accounts? Joint ventures? Anything tied to your son or Victor? I shook my head, but while Tom stepped away to photocopy documents, an old memory surfaced. I remembered the first time Victor met Ethan after the divorce, at a family gathering. Victor had slipped him a business card with that slick, confident smile. Stick with me, kid, he had said. Your dad is good with tools, but I build empires. I had overheard it while signing yet another check to cover Ethan's rent, swallowing my pride like I always did. Tom's advice snapped that memory into focus and turned it into strategy. File for full title transfer on the house, he said. It forces their hand. I left his office with a thick folder of preliminary drafts, the sound of my footsteps echoing down the hallway. The weight had shifted. I felt steadier, stronger. But I was not finished. I drove straight across town to my accountant's office, the truck's tires humming over familiar potholes. I parked beneath a row of budding oak trees and stepped inside the sterile space, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. Ellen, my accountant, greeted me with a brief nod from behind a desk buried in spreadsheets. "Roy, it has been a while," she said. "Sit down and tell me what is going on." I spread out my financial statements, pointing to years of transfers and mortgages. "I am cutting off support to my son," I explained. "But Victor is circling, looking for angles. I want to make sure there is nothing I missed." She adjusted her glasses and pulled up records on her screen, her fingers moving quickly over the keyboard. "Your accounts are clean. Nothing joint with Ethan," she said. Then she paused. "Victor's firm, though. I have seen some filings. There are irregular deductions. If you are thinking audit pressure, the Internal Revenue Service pays attention to tips." Her tone was calm, factual. "Why now?" she asked. "Family fallout," I replied. "And respect that is long overdue." She nodded and continued printing reports while I wrote notes. "Freeze secondary credit access. Anonymous reporting channels." My thoughts flashed back to a winter years earlier, wiring money for Ethan's failed startup, while Victor offered advice from a distance and quietly collected consulting fees that my money ultimately funded. Ellen looked up again. "Secure your retirement accounts first," she said. "If they sue, you counter for repayment of so-called gifts." By the time I left, the sun was dipping lower, my folder thick with annotated pages and clear plans. Driving home along the river road, I ran through a mental checklist. Tomorrow would be implementation day. As I pulled into the driveway, my phone chimed with a new alert, sharp and foreboding. That evening, I sat at my desk under the warm glow of a lamp, the folders spread open in front of me. Papers rustled as I separated them, legal documents on the left, financial records on the right. The house was silent, shadows stretching across the wooden floor, but my focus was razor sharp. I logged into the property portal first, typing quickly as I initiated the title transfer on Ethan's house. I double-checked every address against the deed. The cursor hovered over the submit button for a brief moment as satisfaction bloomed. I clicked. The confirmation email arrived instantly, sounding like a starting gun. Next came certified mail. I sealed envelopes containing notices of asset freezes, pressing each stamp down deliberately. One was addressed to Ethan. Another went to Victor, care of his business address. The printer churned out copies as a memory intruded. Victor raising a champagne glass at Melissa's remarriage party, toasting to new beginnings. While Ethan hung on every word and my quiet contributions vanished into the fizz. That fueled the next step. I opened the anonymous reporting page and typed in the details Ellen flagged. Questionable deductions, dates pulled from public filings. I submitted the report and watched the screen glow back at me. While waiting for confirmation emails, I paced to the window. Outside, the neighborhood was settling down. Children were being called in for dinner. Porch lights flicked on one by one like watchful eyes. Back at the desk, notifications started to roll in. A bank message confirming holds. A delivery tracker for the certified letters. Tension coiled in my chest, but every action strengthened the wall I was building. Then my phone vibrated hard against the desk. Ethan's name flashed urgently on the screen. At the same time, a sharp computer alert cut through the quiet room. I leaned forward as an email from Victor opened, the subject line screaming in capital letters. "Cease your interference immediately." The message was a flood of legal jargon and fury, threats of lawsuits, accusations of harassment, claims that I had overstepped and interfered with family assets he had long since claimed as his own. My coffee mug sat nearby, leaving a faint ring on the paper beneath it, a small imperfection in the gathering storm. Before I could respond, my phone rang again. Victor's number lit up the screen. I answered and set it on the desk, speaker on. "Roy, you old fool," Victor snapped, the polished businessman tone cracking with rage. "What do you think you are doing? Freezing accounts, sticking your nose into my business?" You think I do not know you are behind all this trouble with Ethan? You will regret dragging me into your petty grudge. I stood and walked to the window as the streetlights flickered on in the Rockford dusk. Petty, I said calmly, letting the word hang in the air. I have reclaimed what belongs to me. Victor, I said evenly. Years of my labor propping up your shadow empire. You can threaten all you want. My attorney is already involved. He laughed, a harsh, grating sound that scraped through the speaker. Your attorney? Please. I have legal teams who eat people like you for breakfast. Back off now, or I will bury you in court costs. Ethan does not deserve this. You are destroying him out of pure jealousy. The word jealousy hit a nerve and triggered a memory I had not thought about in years. I saw it clearly. The first barbecue Victor hosted at his massive house a few years after the divorce. Ethan had laughed at his jokes, soaking in the attention, while ignoring a voicemail I left about a construction foreman job I had lined up for him. I had built the bridges. Victor had stolen the crossings. Destroying him? I said calmly. No. I am teaching him something you never did. Real responsibility. The call escalated fast after that. Victor piled on threats, restraining orders, countersuits, financial ruin, until I cut him off mid-rant. Save it for the judge, I said, and ended the call. The silence that followed rang loudly in my ears, but it did not last long. A few moments later, heavy pounding shook the front door, the impact vibrating through the house like thunder. I moved to the entryway and looked through the peephole. Ethan stood on the porch, disheveled, hair wild, eyes blazing under the porch light. I opened the door just a few inches, leaving the chain latched. Ethan, this is not a good time. He shoved against the door, making the wood strain. Let me in, Dad. This has gone too far. You took my car, my house, and now Victor is talking about audits. You are destroying everything. I unlatched the chain and stepped back as he pushed inside, his breath heavy with frustration. The living room lamp cast sharp shadows across his face, highlighting the dark circles under his eyes. Destroying? I said steadily. You did that yourself. You leaned on me while calling Victor your father. Now it is time to stand on your own. He jabbed a finger toward my chest, his voice climbing into jagged peaks. You do not understand. Victor is helping me. He is offering a place to stay and loans. You are just bitter because Mom chose better. Admit it. The word better echoed another memory, standing beside Melissa years ago while she whispered, Victor is good for us, Roy. You need to move on. I had moved on by quietly funding Ethan's life from a distance. I chose better, I said now, holding my ground. I chose you. Every paycheck. Every sacrifice. Victor's help comes with control. Walk away from it, or face what comes next alone. Ethan paced the room, knocking a framed photo crooked on the wall. The old family picture tilted at an angle, just like everything else. Consequences? He snapped. I am homeless because of you. Fix this, or I will join Victor's lawsuit. We will take everything. The standoff peaked, his shouting filling the room, while my replies stayed measured and calm. Sue if you want, I said. The truth is on my side. Finally, he stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. I watched from the window as he climbed into a car that was clearly Victor's. Tires screeched as it sped away into the night. The house grew quiet again, but the air buzzed with unfinished business. The next morning, a delivery van pulled up, its engine idling while the driver stepped out with a thick stack of envelopes. I met him on the porch, the spring sun warming the crisp paper. Official seals glinted like proof of momentum. Inside, I opened the first envelope at the kitchen table. Foreclosure notices spilled out. Ethan's house had officially entered proceedings. The eviction timeline was printed in stark black ink. Later that day, I drove past the property. The Honda's engine hummed smoothly as I slowed near the curb. Moving trucks sat in the driveway. Workers carried boxes under a gray sky while Ethan directed them with slumped shoulders. The lawn was overgrown, weeds breaking through cracks the way reality finally broke through his illusions. I did not stop. I just observed from a distance, a quiet finality settling in my chest. My phone buzzed as I drove. Ethan again. I pulled over near the riverbank, water lapping gently against the shore, and answered. "Dad, please," he said. His voice cracked, stripped of last night's rage. The eviction notice came. "I am packing everything. I have nowhere to go. Victor's place is temporary. Just help me one more time." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, the worn leather familiar beneath my fingers. A memory surfaced. Ethan at 10 years old, clutching my hand after a storm knocked out the power, trusting me to fix everything. Back then, I had wired generators and built safety nets. Now that boy was buried beneath years of entitlement. "One more time," I said quietly. "It has been a lifetime of one more time. Learn from this. Build your own life." His words rushed out in desperation. "I will apologize. I will cut Victor out. I will do anything. Please do not let me end up on the street." The pull was there, but I did not bend. "Apologies do not rebuild respect," I said. "Stand up, Ethan. Call me when you are ready to do that." I ended the call and sat there, watching the river flow steadily past, unstoppable and impartial. I sent a brief update to Tom, who confirmed that proceedings were advancing and Ethan's attempts to delay them were failing. Later, I filed the notices away in my desk drawer, the papers whispering as they settled. My thoughts moved beyond Ethan now, to Victor, to audits, to exposed weaknesses and tightening nets. Consequences were unfolding in layers. With the eviction papers filed neatly away, their sharp edges mirroring the clarity in my mind, I grabbed my folder and headed out. I drove downtown to a quiet cafe in Rockford, ready for whatever came next. The spring air carried the promise of rain as I parked the truck and shut the door behind me. Inside the cafe, steam curled up from a freshly made latte sitting on a corner table, blending with the low murmur of patrons flipping newspapers and murmuring quietly to one another. I took a slow sip, letting the warmth steady me, and dialed Tom, my lawyer, as cups clinked softly in the background. "Roy, give me an update," Tom said when he answered, his voice sharp and ready. "I have the reports Ellen flagged," I replied, opening my folder as pages whispered against each other. "Victor's tax discrepancies. Those questionable deductions from last year's filings. It is time to move." There was a brief pause as papers shuffled on his end. "Both channels," he said finally. "Anonymous tip and formal submission. I will handle the official complaint through my contacts. Issues like this tend to trigger audits quickly. Send me the packet. We will send it certified today." I nodded to myself and scribbled notes on a napkin, the pen moving smoothly. As I scanned the summaries, overstated expenses, suspicious offshore ties, a memory surfaced. Years earlier, Victor had raised a glass at a holiday gathering. To building legacies, he had toasted, winking at Ethan, while I stood quietly nearby, my calloused hands shoved into my pockets after wiring money for their vacation. Back then, he had positioned himself as the visionary. Now, I was exposing the cracks beneath his polish. After we hung up, I emailed the scanned documents straight from my phone, watching the progress bar fill with deliberate calm. Through the cafe window, traffic flowed steadily past, engines humming like the moving parts of a plan finally in motion. Later that afternoon, back home, I began to see the first signs. A local business segment played on my laptop, quietly mentioning rumors of investigations tied to Victor's firm. Clients were reportedly pulling out, wary of potential fines. When I tried calling him, the line went to voicemail after 2 rings. His once confident greeting sounded strained. That evening, a voicemail from him came through. His voice was careful now, no longer smug. "Roy, whatever you are planning, stop. We can talk. We can settle this quietly." I did not respond. Instead, I dug deeper, cross-checking public databases. The glow of the screens reflected my steady focus as hurried restructuring attempts surfaced. Asset shifts, shell moves, all too late. Penalties were coming. His carefully built empire was starting to wobble. The silence from his side felt like a quiet victory. As I drove home under the dimming sky, the river shimmered beside the road, and my thoughts drifted to apologies, to balance, to consequences finally taking shape. That evening, a hesitant knock sounded at the door, pulling me from the kitchen where dusk had settled, shadows stretching across the counters. I approached cautiously and looked through the glass. Ethan stood on the porch, shoulders slumped, his figure small against the fading light. I opened the door, and cool air rushed in, carrying the scent of rain. "Ethan," I said calmly, stepping aside. "Come in." He entered slowly, hands shoved deep into his pockets, eyes fixed on the floor. I turned on the living room lamp, and the warm light filled the space. He paused near the mantel, glancing at the old family photo before finally speaking. His voice was low, uneven, weighed down by regret. After a sleepless night at Victor's place, surrounded by cold luxury and empty promises, he had finally seen the truth. Victor's help came with strings. The eviction notice had cut through his pride. "Dad," he said quietly, "I messed up. Badly. Everything crashed at Victor's. The eviction made it real. I took everything for granted. I called you a loser while living off your work. I am sorry. Truly." I leaned against the wall and crossed my arms, letting the words sit between us. A memory flickered. Ethan as a teenager, grinning as I finished building his treehouse. Summer evenings filled with laughter, moments Victor could never touch. "Words matter," I said evenly, "but actions matter more. You have leaned on crutches for too long." He nodded and pulled a small envelope from his jacket. A handwritten letter, folded carefully. "I know," he said. "No more handouts. I have a job interview tomorrow. Manual work. Like how you started. Victor is backing away too now that his business is in trouble. I see it clearly. He was using me to get to you." The door opened again. Lauren stepped inside, her key turning softly. She sensed the moment immediately. "Dad," she said gently. "Ethan texted me. Everything okay?" Ethan turned to her, his voice breaking slightly. "I am owning it, Lauren. Dad is right. I need to build my own life." We sat together at the table afterward, eating simple sandwiches I had put together. The plates were set carefully, deliberately. Lauren nodded encouragement, her voice calm. "It is a start," she said. "Dad has always been fair." I forgave Ethan then, not with emotion, but with clarity. We shook hands. Firm. Final. "You are family," I told him. "But the support ends here. Earn what comes next." Victor remained silent. No calls. No messages. The absence spoke for itself. When Ethan left, promising change, Lauren hugged me tightly. "I am proud of you, Dad." Later, I filed away old documents in the drawer, their soft rustle marking a quiet close. I stepped into the backyard and looked up at the stars scattered across the sky. I raised an invisible toast to new beginnings, and to boundaries finally held.